Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Woods on behalf of Everbridge, and welcome to today's webinar, The Power of Unified Communications in Driving Return on Investment, an expert panel discussion. The agenda for today is as follows, starting with a brief introduction of the panel, followed by some examples of how you can bring return on investment to your organization. We will then get to the main event, the panel discussion. Please feel free to post questions throughout the presentation. Should you wish to tweet at us, you can see our Twitter handle on the screen, and the hashtag today is BCI Week 2016. The presentation will be recorded and will be available shortly after. So without further ado, let's get started. My name is Andrew Woods, and today I will be your moderator. My background is in the world of business continuity and spans over 12 years, based on setting up and maintaining a resiliency program of large multinational corporations with over 150,000 employees in 60+ countries. Having been responsible for the BCM life cycle, I have either been lucky or unlucky, depending on your opinion, to have managed numerous crisis events, from small fires and floods up to region-shaping events. Now I would like to hand over to Regina Phelps. Regina, would you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Andrew. I'm president of EMS Solutions. We're based in San Francisco, California, in the United States. We've been in practice since 1982, a very long time. We specialize in crisis management team development, exercise design, all things business continuity, and because of my nursing background, infectious disease and pandemic planning, because of course nurses love diseases. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Regina. Matt, would you please like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So I am Matt Ward. I've been with Everbridge for approximately about 9 years now, working on a consultant basis for a lot of our global, including small, medium, and large clients, and helping them kind of work through the best practices of how to roll out a system, get that return on investment, and make sure that they've got a good standing of how to utilize the system, and make sure that everybody understands and really figures out how to utilize it properly. So I've been working with a lot of clients over the years.
Thank you very much, Matt. And definitely last but not least, please, David, could you introduce yourself?
Thanks. My name's David Key. I'm a consultant doing business continuity and crisis management, mainly in the energy sector and mainly in Europe, with an emphasis, I guess, on critical national infrastructure. And I previously led on business continuity management for an oil multinational.
Thank you very much, David. So let's move into the warm-up. So moving from a cost center to a profit. So please, if you'll allow me to set the scene. What if? What if we get snowed in? What if there's a fire? What if there's a flood? What if? That's the question, is it not? Often, we plan for the what-if events or treat our plans like an insurance policy to be taken off the shelf if something goes wrong. Or maybe it's there just as a safety net. Maybe not everyone gets what we do or why we do it. Some examples I've heard are, well, we have backup tapes, so that's DR right. Or, well, we've got a paper calling tree. That's a crisis management plan. We're good to go. And one of my favorites, the 20 of us traders can all go around to our boss's house and use his Wi-Fi. That's a BC, that plan. Yes? Maybe not. In the ever-changing world of business continuity, we need to be able to demonstrate the value of our tools, our plans and our processes, and clearly communicate them throughout our organization. Not only communicate in terms of why we do this, but also what value we bring to the organization. Maybe the value is not always clear. We can't always discover an outdated DR solution or process that may no longer be used and can be set aside. Or maybe it's the opposite. Perhaps we found out that those old backup tapes everyone thought would be just fine are not, and would no longer enable you to restore your data in an acceptable amount of time. So how do we show value, and how can we deliver that transition from a cost center to a profit center? Allow me to give you some examples that I've observed. So a great example is in the change management sphere. Change management can be IT change, or it can be any other form of change in a logistics, transportation, or just about any other complex environment that may require a large change with user acceptance testing. When you need to be able to communicate the progress of your change with your testers and with your leadership, that is a way that you can use the tool sets available to you to enable your business to be more competitive. How about giving your traveling employees a safety net to allow them to reach out when their trip does not maybe go to plan, or just to check in once they have arrived to say, hey, I'm here, I'm safe, but I want to let you know that I am. Again, this might be something that you've got the tools and you've got the capability to do, but perhaps it's something that you've never been able to demonstrate. Or how about ensuring that time-sensitive deliveries have the correct employees waiting for them at the delivery dock at the right time? No risk of delay or the products going bad. With just-in-time logistics networks and the ever-competitive nature of business, this can be a very, very powerful thing to enable our business partners to be able to leverage. These are just some of the examples of how we can demonstrate using our tool sets to benefit our businesses, to give them capabilities perhaps above and beyond where they have been in the past, to enable very rapid network growth and communication within an organization. Ultimately, this can really help us when it comes round to next year's budget. And obviously the knock-on effect from that is that your business continuity or your resiliency function is seen as absolutely essential to the organization. So I really do hope that I've given you some food for thought there and been able to set the scene for us to now go into our main section, the panel discussion. As I said earlier, please do feel free to post questions, as we do want to be able to answer your questions following the statements here. So I should just pause for a second so we've got a nice clean entrance. Okay, so question number one is, in your role, how much does return on investment influence your program? Content, staffing, capabilities, etc. Regina, could I throw this one over to you, please, first?
Sure, I'd be happy to start. First of all, when you talk about return on investment, I think it's first of all very helpful to look at the definition of what ROI means. The traditional definition actually measures the amount of return relative to the cost that you've actually incurred. But then when you think about business continuity, how do you do ROI? And I think it's a really important question. If you haven't had an activation of any of your plans recently, and it's very likely that you haven't, how do you talk about how much money you've saved the business or what you've been able to contribute in our traditional role? You could extrapolate, gee, if this had happened, how helpful we would have been or how much money we would have saved the company. But I think we need to actually turn this into a different question in some ways. And I'd be inclined to really shift the question, just as Andrew has been talking about, from ROI in that traditional definition to value. What value do we provide the business? And as we talk through all these questions, I'll be touching back on this particular topic because I think it's one of the most critical ones business continuity planners around the world face, which is show me the value of what you provide the company on a daily basis. Because if all you ever say to your boss is, when the bad thing happens, you'll be really glad you have me, that's not a good reply to what are you doing for us.
Regina, that's really insightful. Matt, could I get your thoughts on that question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So one of the things that to add to what Regina mentioned is is, out of the hundreds of clients that I've dealt with over the years, it's always important to make sure that, you demonstrate the value. And sometimes it's not as easy as saying, hey, it's an insurance policy, and that's what a lot of people think of these types of programs. So one of the things you really want to focus on, and we'll talk as we go through this, is really what other things could we potentially be utilizing this for? Because sometimes, people just need to see and really be able to really touch almost physically a tangible thing of how do I get that return on investment. So I think as we go through this, we can talk about some of the other ways that you can utilize, these types of programs out there in terms of to help really demonstrate the value and even put some dollar figures to it and really make that value, as Regina mentioned, really top-notch and a key focus for everybody.
Wow, good stuff. And David, what's your take on this?
Well, if I could just build on what Matt and Regina are saying, I think most of us find that the company has a strategy and it has objectives. And for me, absolutely key is to show how business continuity enables the company or the organization to achieve its objectives. So if we've got a good idea of what the objectives are, we can demonstrate that we're enabling something to happen. That in itself is not strictly, as Regina said, delivering return on investment quantified, but it is demonstrating value, and that's what I found is one way to view this.
Yeah, that's very, very insightful. I think the key takeaway there is really talking about the demonstration of value when we talk about return on investment. So I'm going to move this forward to the next question, which is, how does one demonstrate value, ROI, in a BC program? So to really build on that last question, I think we'll go with the same way as we did before. So if I can go to Regina first, that would be wonderful. Did we lose Regina?
Sorry, I'm here. If an outage occurs, that's pretty easy when you actually talk about demonstrating value. But in lieu of no outage, how do you demonstrate that your program has any value? And I think if we look at our 34 years of practice, on an average, most of our clients around the world have had very few interruptions. So we can't sit on those laurels. I think it's important for us when we're really talking about demonstration of value to stop for a moment, and I would ask everybody that's on this call that's listening to us to really peel back your program and begin to really look at it how your executives might look at it. For example, we have had many of our clients in the last 5 years in particular, especially since the financial meltdown of 2008 and 2009, to look at us deeply in the eyes and say, okay, how could you do recovery differently? I know this is how it's been done historically. I understand that these standards require certain types of practices for a BIA or a business continuity plan. But look, how could you do this differently? So I would ask everybody on this call, when you're talking about return on investment and value in a program, thinking about if you had to do it differently and your boss said to you, how would you do it differently? What would you say? How could you deliver similar results but develop it differently? How could you actually go about a BIA in the non-traditional way, which we've increasingly been doing in our client population? And so what's that value add-on of business continuity? Is it only for a disaster, or is there value in every day? And I would really hope when you're looking at your program and asking the question, how can I do recovery differently, that you're asking yourself, what value do I provide to the business every single day? Not just when the bad thing happens, but every single day. And I think that will really help us as we continue to peel this back of talking about return on investment.
Hey, Regina, great statement. Matt, could I have your thoughts, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And in my opinion, Regina really hit the nail right on the head, is how do we do this on a daily basis? Because, yes, emergencies and disasters don't always happen. And sometimes that's what it takes to get somebody to actually put something in place. But then if we can really look at this and say, what can we do on a daily basis to really make this ingrained as a part of our program, and sometimes not even just in the BC program. you really need to start thinking outside the box as how can I be an advocate to help put these types of programs within other aspects of our business. So if we're talking daily communication, if we've got, some of these smaller, not necessarily disastrous or crisis outages, but if we've got daily smaller outages, think about the money and the time that could be saved by utilizing these types of tools. And we have clients that literally every second that there's any type of downtime, it's $2,400 a second, $144,000 a minute. So that's the simple way to quantify things. And then the other aspect is, okay, what other daily type things could we be utilizing around the organization to help keep staff and employees accountable and safe, including their families. So what are those daily things that are occurring around our organization, especially if you're a multinational or you've got multiple locations around the world, what could potentially be happening from a daily weather situation, civil unrest, those types of things. So how can we utilize those on a daily basis, on a smaller basis, versus just always looking at it from a pressure standpoint?
Absolutely great points there. And David, if we could have your input, that would be great.
I just had an idea that it's a slightly different take, but rather than looking at the whole program and saying what is the value and trying to demonstrate that, I found that I've more often found small pockets of value around the organization. So, for example, if I'm looking at a whole supply chain, it might be that with the commercial guys or the distribution, there's a specific value to them. And they're kind of like a one client of me, the business continuity practitioner, and they're getting value out of the process, and quite often it's in the analysis. So that understanding of what their critical processes are and what we're doing with them and how it fits with the larger picture, because those little pockets of value will tend to aggregate up. And by the end of a program, or when we're actually into the implementation and we're rolling, those little pockets of value add up to something. But I would just say that I haven't had great success in trying to articulate value or return on investment across a whole program right on day one.
That's interesting that you bring up that point about day one there, David. I think that's a very good point to note when you're thinking about your program and your strategy. Before we move on, would anybody like to make any more comments on that particular topic?
Let me just chime in on that. I certainly agree that I think that a program is comprised of lots of small pockets. And when you look at it, it's not an overall program per se, but there's all of the different ways that we contribute as business continuity professionals. And many of it is in these little tiny spaces within the organization. And I think when you're trying to build your value story, you need to actually look at it not only from the broad program, but also certainly in all of those ways that we contribute. And when you start to make a list of them, there's actually quite a few.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Anybody else? Okay, so we shall move on to the next question, which does fit very nicely. What are examples of a good return on investment besides VC will be helpful when the disaster happens? Regina, could we have your thoughts on this first, please?
Sure, and I would say, first of all, to all the listeners in this particular program, that this really is what I would say to each and every one of you, is that this is your homework assignment from this webinar that you're listening to today. And I would really ask all of you, after you're done with this call today, to really sit and think about what are examples and ways that you can say that your program provides value to the overall organization, whether it's broadly across your program or something that might be, as we just heard about, individual pockets within the group. So I would say that all of you need to come up with probably at least 7, 8, 9, 10 of those. And let me just give you a few things for you to think about. So a classic example on return on investment is regulatory compliance. So even if your organization is not subject to requirements from an external regulator, it may be in the future, but also your customers might have requirements. Increasingly, here in the United States in particular, there are many organizations who work with the banking sector, and they are required actually have all of the same compliance-related issues as the federally regulated banking organizations. So that might be one example. The second might be a competitive advantage, the fact that your company has a well-established program. So whether it's the supply chain continuity planning or something in crisis management or communications or your ITDR resiliency program, those are all competitive advantages that you can sell your business to when you're talking to your big customers about how you will actually continue to be in practice. There's also a great opportunity for brand and reputation protection. So think about the current cyber breaches that are happening around the world and the incredible impact to brand and reputational damage because of how things were managed or not managed. So that's another example. Another could be risk identification. Because of our programs and the risk assessments that we provide, we have really great data that we can really help to ensure that our locations around the world are actually as safe as possible based on their risk profile. We can have operational improvements. So as we do a BIA in the business continuity plan, we can actually determine ways that we can actually be more efficient and effective on a daily basis. So we can actually increase awareness. We can make operational improvements that may not actually happen because of that particular activity. We also have knowledge capture. So think of a business continuity plan as a training document. So if you're trying to train new employees, look at that great document you've got that tells exactly what's mission critical and what needs to get done. And then also we have the ability of increased robustness in the sense that we actually are able to ensure that we can maintain through even small disruptions and, of course, the large ones. And then also you might have cost savings. You might have cost savings through insurance or other programs related to your programs. So there could be cost savings. So I just mentioned 8 right there. So I would encourage all of you to think about the other ones that you might have as well that you could add to that, or maybe other ones that are completely different. But you should have a list. I call it an elevator speech. When your boss says to you, what are you doing that provides value to this company, you should not have to think 1 second. You should be able to literally spit out 8 to 10 things right away that your program is doing on a daily basis.
Thanks very much, Gina. And I have to say your comment there has just started off a flurry of questions. So that's good food for thought there, hey? So, Matt, can we have your thoughts on the question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And Regina hit the head there is you got to come up with as many ideas as possible. And there's a lot of resources out there. So obviously this conversation we're having right now is a resource, but there's a lot of resources out there that can help you with those things. And all of you sit on different committees and you're with your regional partners, with your business partners within your organization. So, really what you need to work on is look at, what keeps each individual awake at night, what keeps you up at night. And as David mentioned earlier too, it's about the small successes too. It's working within each organization or each department. So, if I'm, part of, some of my asset protection, or maybe I'm looking at, refrigeration units. So if a refrigeration unit goes out, how do we respond to that? How do we make sure that we don't lose millions of dollars worth of product or research? So when you start to really look at each organization or each department within your organization is how can we help those things? How can we help each one of those on an individual basis? And really start to spread that out, and that way it's really easy. It's really easy to quantify when you do have those things. So whether, again, it is, refrigeration units, whether it's an IT outage, those are the things that you want to be looking at is within each organization, each of my colleagues, or within each of my, my other committee members is what keeps them awake at night. What are they worried about? And then how can I help that? How can I help, make sure that they're protected as well? And that really will raise the awareness within the organization and make it a lot easier, as Regina mentioned, when somebody asks you, what do you do? Here's all the people that I help, and here's all the organizations within my teams that I help.
Matt, some really engaging points there. And David, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I was listening to someone else talking about business continuity recently, and they said that strategy is about how the organization can work, and business continuity is about how the organization won't work. And I've got to say, I don't agree with that. I think he was missing a point, because actually our activities and strategy are at times really closely aligned. And I just want to give one example, if I may. I was doing some work with a large company which has gone through a process of acquisition. So there's a lot of change going on, and the business continuity activity was about getting aligned and understanding the whole picture. So that bit we used to call understanding the business was absolutely crucial, and the output of that was value, and it was things like being able to explain the value chain and being able to understand the interdependencies and the whole supply chain through to, you know the kind of outputs I'm talking about. Now, what really made me feel that we've achieved some value is when the strategy team started using my PowerPoints to explain how the business was going to work. And if we can get to that stage, we've kind of brought our business continuity activity into the mainstream, and we're supporting delivery of the business objectives.
That's a really interesting perspective. Are there any additional thoughts on this topic before we move on? Not, we shall go to the next question. So, the next question is, how do you communicate the value of your BC program to all levels of an organization, be that tools, reporting, etc.? So, Regina, if I can have your thoughts on that first, please.
Sure, happy to. What I encourage people to think about when they're thinking about their business continuity program, so whether you're the overall program director or you're just part of the business continuity process down at the departmental level, think of business continuity as a product that needs to actually be marketed and actually marketed strategically within an organization. We are a cost item on a budget spreadsheet. And people often, when times are tough, will be running their fingers down that spreadsheet, looking at what is costing the company money, and is there a way that they can actually minimize that cost. I've seen this increasingly, especially since the financial meltdown of the 2008-9 period. So, how do you prove, how do you demonstrate, how do you show that what you're doing really has value on a regular basis? Well, just think of it like a product. I would ask all of our listeners to really think about what's the marketing approach for your particular program. What are you doing to continue to talk about the importance of it? And there's really two ways of looking at this. I often tell my clients that they have to think about it from two perspectives. One is what I call the overt marketing efforts, and the other is what is more covert. I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's more under the radar, so to speak. So what would be an example of an overt effort? So, for example, in many countries around the world, there are certain months that are designated for awareness. So in the United States, for example, in the state of California, which is where I hail from, April is Earthquake Month. And so there's a great opportunity that happens in the media every month in April where there's lots of discussion about what you would do to actually survive an earthquake. There's also another month for fire. There's another month for overall preparedness. And so there's things like that that you can frankly hook your program to, and you can use it to increase awareness not just for your program, but also for family preparedness. So, as we all know as continuity planners, if families aren't prepared, your folks aren't coming to work. So, use that as kind of an example. So those are examples of overt marketing. You're basically loudly proclaiming value. You're loudly talking about how you can help not only the business, but people's families, and you're tying it to things that mean something to folks, right? So it's really logical. So what's an example of covert marketing? Well, I use this actually a lot, and I use it, and I encourage my clients to use it all the time. The idea is that when things come up in the news, for example, we've been doing a huge amount of work recently in the cyber breach world as far as designing exercises for cyber breach events. And every time there's a breach that comes out, I actually, that I see it as either something similar to what one of our clients does, I always send them a quick email with the link to the story in case they had not seen it, because maybe it's in a similar industry. It's a way of kind of keeping business leaders and executives aware of what's going on in our industry. They may not have seen that story, or they may not have connected it directly to them. But you can inform people, and by doing that, you're also providing value. You're telling them, wow, I'm looking out for these particular issues, and wow, this is kind of similar to us. Also doing analysis of contemporary events that are going on, and imagining what would happen if it was you that happened to. So one of the things that we utilize a lot, and I encourage our clients to utilize, is Google Alerts. And I'm sure, of course, everyone knows about Google, but the question is, do you know about Google Alerts? It's a free part of Google where you can actually just Google Alerts, and you can actually drop in a whole series of topics that you would like Google to send you a daily email about. So for us, gosh, we have a ton of things. We have earthquakes and volcanoes and shooters at work, and things like cyber breaches and so on and so on. I probably have 30 or so Google Alerts, and every morning, Mama Google sends me an email, and it gives me a list of things that I'm interested in. And I can look through those pretty quickly, and I can say, wow, that's really interesting. I'm going to send that link to this particular business leader. And it's a way that I can, again, continue to show that programs and what we're doing has value on a regular basis. So that's kind of an example of awareness building from to business leaders or other individuals within your organization to continue to market how important you are. So when you talk about marketing and communication and talking about business continuity plans, just think about looking at this as a product, and you are trying to sell its value throughout the organization at all of the levels that there is.
Thank you, Regina. And Matt, what are your thoughts on this topic, please?
Yeah, and I think to add to Regina there, it goes back to also some of the different use cases and communicating, and when you have different tools at your disposal, that you think about the different software that you use, think about the different reporting and analytics tools that you have, and as you look at the other use cases around your organization, think of how those could potentially be utilized around with other departments and your colleagues. So if you have certain aspects to certain tools or have access to certain tools that could be utilized, make that aware of everybody else. And then as you start to leverage those tools in other places, the value kind of builds itself, because now you're starting to be utilized across the board. You're starting to be utilized for different things. So if you think about notification tools and utilizing them for HR policy updates, or when you have an outage of some kind, or one of the examples I remember is, we had a lot of clients in Virginia. There was an earthquake that happened, which, if any of you guys know, is very rare in Virginia. So what happens? 911 centers are lit up. Help desks are lit up. People start calling all their family members because everybody's wondering. The simple question was that an earthquake? What do I do during that? So they don't have the type of awareness that we have out here on the West Coast of California. But being able to leverage the different tools that you have to send out messages or to leverage the analytics and the reporting to make sure that people are aware of these different things that are occurring really minimizes the outages or the issues that you may have or the disruptions you may have in your daily, in the daily progress of your organization. So having those types of things and those use cases across the board and getting them into other parts really builds that value in the VC program and, really helps you communicate it as you're utilizing it for all those different things. So it's kind of a natural buildup as people start to leverage the tools that you've either purchased or that you manage. So it naturally builds that value.
Great perspective there. And David, can I get you to weigh in, please?
Well, Andrew, I was thinking about external communication there, and it just struck me that all these companies spend a huge amount of money on promoting the brand, and actually here's an opportunity maybe, because companies who we partner with and companies who are in the supply chain with us are given comfort and are given reassurance by our resilience. And just a practical way of doing that, which I found, is to be able to communicate not just the fact that we have plans and we do planning, but to be able to share elements of our business continuity planning output. I know obviously a lot of it is going to be very sensitive and commercially sensitive, but opportunities where I've been able to share with partners the outputs of our planning have been valuable, because on the one hand it's enhanced our reputation, it's enhanced the perception that we hold, and also it's sometimes encouraged other people to do the same thing, to partner with us. So that's just a specific example.
Hey, that's great. That's a great example. So does anyone have any sort of closing thoughts on this one around communicating the effectiveness inside your organization? Would anyone else like to weigh in?
Yeah, Andrew, I might chime in once more, because I heard it a little bit from David and a little bit from Regina as well. Is even the family aspect of things is how do we communicate that level of program that you're helping your organization and helping your family members as well. So I know around the world the perspective on different things is different on how you communicate, or what is our BC program going to be like if I need to communicate with my staff, and a lot of people don't necessarily, depending where you are in the country, don't necessarily like that, or may look at it as being, okay, well, now you're monitoring my activities, you're monitoring my different things, when it really should be looked at as, our BC program is to keep, our assets and, our people safe, and help us respond to the IT incidences and those types of things as well. But if I look at it as, and really push that around my organization as, we are going to help keep you and your family safe, that's something that's really key. And that really gets the buy-in and communicates the value from everybody. And as David mentioned, the brand recognition as well. You look at it as an organization that keeps people safe. So we've got clients that actually utilize the system, during crisis events to actually notify people out there and ask them if they or if themselves or even their family has been affected, and do they need any of our resources? Do they need human resources? Do they need any type of help from our organization? So those are the types of things that can increase both the awareness, from the increasing the level of family that's involved, as well as family safety, and then really increasing that brand awareness as well as being a tool, or being an organization that really supports me and my family and make sure everybody's safe and accountable.
Yeah, some really great points there from Matt. Would anyone else like to weigh in?
Yeah, if I could build on what Matt just talked about. When you look at the concept of an emergency notification system, just as Matt was saying, sometimes employees might look at that as encroachment on their personal life, trying to have a call system that actually has maybe their personal mobile device on it or their home phone. But that really is a marketing issue, as we were just talking about earlier about marketing this program. It's the same as marketing an ENS. Emergency notification systems, by their very nature, are so important these days. And when they first came out, they were thought to be kind of nice to have, but in reality, they're really critically important. And a great example is how you can reach employees and find out if they have needs or concerns. Can they come to work? Do they have a particular need? But sometimes people view it as being an invasion of their privacy. So I think this goes back to another marketing issue. How do you convince your employees? How do you market to them that actually having their information in an emergency notification system is going to be helpful to them for many, many reasons? And so it's another example, again, of providing value to your employees and their families, but also the importance of how you can market what we do on a daily basis that, again, shows value every single day.
Yeah, agreed 100%.
Yeah, that's a great point, Regina, and I can certainly tell you, coming from the other side of the pond, we have some very, very robust data privacy laws, which means that it can be very difficult to use those kinds of tools. So we have to be very, very clear in the way that we communicate around them. And often going in with the safety aspect is actually the path of least resistance, because people do genuinely, generally feel good about their organization looking after them. Not every time, but generally speaking. So that's a really, really great takeaway there. Any more thoughts before we move on? Okay, so we shall move on to our last question. So what was your biggest win in terms of return on investment, and how did you communicate it? Regina, can we go to you first, please?
Sure, happy to do that. So when we look at return on investment after any type of either activation or, for that matter, an exercise, how you communicate those results are really important. So let me give you an example of an exercise as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing a large number of cyber breach exercises. We just finished one with a very large central bank that took us 15 months to plan. The learnings were so critically important, the bank actually did a huge amount of outreach about the actual findings, which included in their organization video presentations, articles within their internal publications for employees, pieces that they actually then delivered to their customers, if you will, the other financial institutions in that country. And what they did is they took it as an opportunity to share what they learned, as well as to promote increased preparedness. So what I'm building on is that when you have an activation or an exercise, you should be always crafting a well-developed after-action report. That after-action report is so important because what it does is it captures what was learned, but then it also has a lot of ideally observations, or what we sometimes might call recommendations, although I'm reluctant to use that word because so many of our clients are federally regulated in their countries that the word recommendation has kind of a heavy stick, meaning they have to do it. So we most commonly call those observations. So when we list our observations, we present a variety of things that they need to do to really solve the problems that were discovered, as well as to improve their overall programs. But I think the key thing is that once those after-action reports are developed and they're issued, then internally within any organization, you need to think about what is the way you get those reports, first of all, in front of the right people. Because if you don't get it in front of the right people, it's not going to serve you. So, for example, if you're publicly traded in many parts of the world, you might have to have a risk committee on the executive committee or board. That'd be a great spot for it to go. Obviously to your executives, obviously to your executive sponsors. So first of all, make a list of who are the people that you need to get this in front of, whether it's an after-action report after a real incident or one after an exercise. Who needs to see it? How can you build some support for those observations/recommendations? What is your overall strategy to get those things in the right eyes, and so that they can actually make some decisions? And often those have financial consequences. So how are you going to make that happen? So that should be part of your process. And then what you want to make sure is that once those observations have been seen by the right people, they have been blessed, and then they are then tasked to be accomplished. And how are you going to do that? How are you going to track that? And how are you going to make sure that those things happen so that you can continue to constantly provide value? So whether it's a real activation or an exercise, that's really, really important. So I think after-action reports and your plan and process for getting those in front of the right people, all the appropriate follow-up, and then rescheduling an exercise to see if you improved, really important. And then really to build on that piece is to really go back to your internal marketing plan that hopefully you're going to design after this webinar about how you can market your program. What do you need to do to tweak it to make sure that you're, again, telling your story about a great exercise you did, or a great activation and how you successfully accomplished that, or, wow, we had lots of mistakes, but boy, we really learned, always turning it into a positive thing. And then utilize all the possible tools you have to your disposal. So whether that's, social media, so maybe you have a Facebook or Twitter account, Instagram, and whatever those platforms you're using, LinkedIn. And some of those could be internally facing only, like an internal Facebook page or an internal Twitter account. So making sure that people know what you're doing, and then also placing that in your overall communications within the organization so that people can see what you've done. I think it's really important to utilize every opportunity you have to provide value, and I think talking about your exercises is one of the best ways, because frankly we don't have a lot of activations, but exercises are the closest things that many of us get to. So selling those things as well.
Excellent points, Regina. Excellent points. Matt, could I ask you to chime in, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I look at this is I look at this kind of on two different fronts. So, from an ROI standpoint, what can we do monetarily, and how are we saving money? So kind of before, how are we doing things today? And then after an event, how do we accomplish utilizing the different tools that we have at our disposal and the different plans that we've created. So today, here's what we've done. Here's how long it took us to respond to an incident, and afterwards, here's how much we improved. So that's from a monetary standpoint, in many cases, that can be easier to look at. So if there's an IT outage or an asset outage, how fast did we respond? So did we minimize the downtime by 5 minutes, by 10 minutes, and then in that downtime, how much does that cost us? So how much money did that save us? So that's a little bit easier. The other aspect I look at is how did we respond in terms of just keeping people safe and informed. So that's something that when you look at a Paris or Brussels situation, how did we track our staff and make sure they were accountable and safe? And that's a little bit tougher because now you need to make sure you before, how did we do this? So was it a call tree, or was it just an email and hope that people respond? And then afterwards, if we've got other tools at our disposal, whether it's an ENS tool or some other types of, whether, as Regina mentioned, utilizing different social media outlets or other internal systems. So how did we do that after the fact, and how did we improve upon that? That's something that's really, really important, is to, after an event like that, how quickly were we able to make everybody accountable and make sure our staff was safe and accounted for? And that's something that, and the question about is how do we communicate these types of results? If you are utilizing a communication method, again, whether it's an ENS or internal programs, social media, other systems, that naturally communicates it. So when you start to get people, getting people's responses and seeing that information flow and those messages go out and the responses coming back into your system, into your reports, and as Regina mentioned, into your after actions, people will naturally see that, especially if you're communicating on a mass scale and you're getting that information back. So, and then you want to obviously compile that information. And if the executives weren't already aware of it, they're definitely aware of it now. And make sure that it hits them right in the face that says, hey, this is what we did during this event, and this is what changed versus our old methods of doing things versus what we're doing today. And here's how much faster we were able to do it based on, our BC plans and the tools that we purchased or the tools that we use.
Hey, that's very insightful. David, could I ask you to chime in, please?
Yeah, Andrew, these are all really good points. I'm just going to give one example, if I may. And one really good return on investment, you could say, was, I'm going back 6 years now, but we were operating in a North African country, and at the time there was a crisis where the main emphasis on the surface of it was to reduce the risk to people, and a lot of the emphasis was on drawing down people and evacuating. So actually what we had to do was to balance that need with the need to maintain business in that country, because we were operating business which was critical to the host government, and we were operating business which was critical to our survival as well. So what we were looking at was a huge range of stakeholders and a lot of pressure from government, host government, public perception, shareholder, another stakeholder perception. There were political aspects, economic aspects, social aspects, but what we were able to do was actually use business continuity planning that we'd done in order to understand what was needed to keep the business going at the level we needed to keep it. And that really made the difference between an unnecessarily chaotic management of a crisis to something which had some order and structure and had some sort of priorities, and actually resulted in us maintaining the business, doing what business continuity needs to do, but also maintaining safety of life. So how do we communicate that? Well, we really worked through an advocate, and for me the advocate was the regional executive vice president, because he understood this, he could see, and we had some face time with him as we worked through it, and he could see that this was the difference between him keeping his bonus and him losing his bonus and possibly his job. But more importantly, it was absolutely key. Business continuity was key to very rapidly getting that balance. And I think, if he was a successful advocate for us, I think Microsoft will call it an evangelist maybe, but he was our communication tool, if you like. And we didn't need to shout about it because we had people who could see the value who were doing it for us.
Wonderful, wonderful. Good insight there. Would anyone else like to comment on the topic we just talked about? Okay, so if all of our panelists are still okay to stay, we've got a couple of questions come in. The first question is, what is the most effective driver to justify a more or less expensive investment in business continuity strategy? So perhaps, Regina, if you could answer that one first, or weigh in on that.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. If you're looking at an investment, so whether it's a piece of software, you're buying an emergency notification system, or perhaps it's servers or things like that, when you're really talking about expending a large amount of money, you're going to need to have really a strong financial case to build for that. Because you're asking a company to invest their hard-earned dollars, you're going to need to be able to demonstrate what exactly you hope to achieve. Now, some of those things might be very hard and factual. So, for example, I think as Matt was saying earlier, if you have so many minutes down, what the cost will be. But many things, for example, may not necessarily have that kind of dollar-to-dollar or currency-to-currency example. So I think what I would suggest to any of you who are looking at expending a large amount of money on a particular product or service, that you really deeply do some very big brainstorming, and I call this whiteboarding, if you will, where you get a couple of the right people in the room to really talk about what the benefits of this particular program that you're, or product that you're planning on purchasing, what the real benefits are, and really divide them really into two categories. One is the very tangible dollar or currency amount that you can actually point to and say, this is going to save us X if something happens. And then I think the next column is probably issues related to the overall impact to the business, which may or may not have a dollar amount attached to it. And then thirdly, really, I think, is really looking at their reputation and brand impact to the company if you're not able to sustain your level of service or your business availability as you normally have it. And increasingly, reputation and brand, which is not measurable easily, especially at the beginning, but has very significant consequences. So if a reputation and brand example might be something that you would be pointing to as, wow, we need to really do this, I would really encourage you then to do some Google searching on companies who have had big outages and big problems, and then look at what their stock price might have done or their actual share of customers, how that might have dropped or changed based on that outage or that problem, so that you can say, by extrapolation, if something like this happened to us, we might suffer a similar kind of loss. So reputation and brand, which is not tangible but extremely important, needs to be factored into your discussion. So I would encourage you to get a group together, brainstorm those three topic areas, and then develop the arguments, if you will, to be able to acquire what you're looking for.
Wonderful, wonderful answer. David, can we go to you, sir?
Well, I guess in an ideal world, we would present options, and then the leadership team would make decisions based on risk appetite. But does that happen in reality? Well, I don't know if it happens that much, because quite often people don't understand the options, they don't really understand their risk appetite, and they make decisions that are convenient or they're based on gut instinct. So here I think is another opportunity for us as practitioners to do two things. And I think the first thing is to really articulate the options. Now the question was about, the less expensive or the more expensive, but I think it goes a bit deeper than that. I think it's the ability to articulate what the options are and the consequences of those options, and to really demand that the organization understands its own risk appetite. Because if you've got those things right, then our executive board can make decisions based on evidence rather than how they feel.
Okay, great. I'm going to skip us on to the next question, if that's okay, because we are starting to run up against the time barrier. The next question, I think, may have already been answered in some way, which is BC, a business continuity program, return on investment, includes exposure and or vulnerability of the company in the marketplace. Sometimes negative publicity may impact or have long-term ramifications on the future of revenue. Are you able to quantify brand exposure? This sounds like a Regina and David question.
I think, again, what I would do is I would look at case studies for that. So kind of like the Harvard School of Business. Harvard School of Business will actually look at case studies to try and extrapolate what that impact might be to you. So I would say the same thing in this particular example. If you have an industry, and let's make up a story, let's say that it's in banking, and you are trying to build a case for a particular action or activity within your program, I think it's well serves you to look at your industry, look exactly what's happened historically, and see if there are ways you can extrapolate that story to you if indeed that happened to you. So again, this goes back to this little concept of Google Alerts and really monitoring things within either subject matter issues like cyber breach, hurricanes, whatever, or particular industries, and then being able to monitor those so that you can have those in your back pocket, if you will, when these type of opportunities come forward, so that you're not flat-footed.
Good point. Good point. David, let's weigh in on that.
I just agree with Regina. It's down to case studies. There is no real metric for it. I think one thing did surprise me when I started looking at this is that where you think in some case studies there would be an impact because of a decision or because of an event, sometimes it doesn't have that impact on share value, and sometimes it does. So it's just not easy to predict. And I would say that the best we can do is understand the potential for it. And also just bear in mind one last thing is the kind of time scales involved in impact, because quite often you get a short-term impact which bounces back. Sometimes you get one which suppresses value for a long time and can actually take you out of opportunities. So there's various different factors there, and I think you need a good range of case studies to show the potential.
Yeah, that's a very good point you make about short-term versus long-term impact. I think we've got just enough time for one question. I'm really keen to hear both everybody's input on this one. So, cyber attacks seem to be the topic of the day, and the question that I've got coming here, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, is there a difference between a crisis management plan for a cyber attack versus a standard crisis management plan? So I think we'll go to Regina first on this, if that's okay.
Sure. Let me just talk about that. All the crisis management plans that we write are hazard neutral, meaning that they are applicable for any type of incident. However, in a cyber-related event in the United States, and I do not know about other places around the world, there are privacy laws that call into play. So, for example, if you're dealing with a case of the release of health information or the release of employee identification, such as Social Security numbers, or perhaps you're looking at credit card or banking information, that in the United States it puts in a whole other set of regulations. So, in particular clients who have a breach with the loss of data that is private, that is held under these privacy laws, their crisis management teams are composed completely differently, because in order to be able to evoke the protections under those laws, the information has to be held very closely within that structure. So all of our crisis management plans are essentially all hazards, if you will. However, when there is privacy information released, there is a different issue based on legal privilege in the United States. I would also just say, as to build on that, is that in designing cyber exercises, which we have done quite a few in the last 3 years, In particular, the design of those is completely different than a regular exercise. So there are things about a cyber event that are very unique and different, but for the most part, the crisis management processes would be the same.
Wonderful. Yes. I've certainly got experience of the European data privacy issues myself. David, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think we're along the same lines here. The crisis management framework stays the same. However, it's like the approach to kidnap for ransom. It's a different plan. It's a contingency plan which is very specific. There's very different people in the room with piracy, with hostile takeover. What else? A dawn raid. You know, these contingency plans are in the appendix, and they need to be brought into play really quickly so we have the right people in the room, and the framework for crisis management stays the same. So I'm on the same page with Regina.
Wonderful. And Matt, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think just in terms of setting it all up, from each different crisis management plan. I mean, if you have a breach, as Regina mentioned, there's different things that happen. So if there's a breach, who do I want to communicate to? And so when that happens, and where do I want to communicate? So if there's a breach and it affects my email, there's no reason for me to send out an email anymore, right? So we need to have that in a plan, that we need to go different avenues and have a plan to hit other modes of communication. And do I need to then go to secure channels? Is there an opportunity for us to be utilizing any type of internal secure type messaging? You know, I've heard different people during different breaches, people are using WhatsApp. Well, there's really no auditing to that, or in Regina's case where she was mentioning healthcare, there's no HIPAA compliance. So if we are sharing PHI, we've got a problem. So, you've got the ability to really focus on each one of these types of events and, all right, who do I need to communicate? What channels do I need to communicate? And ultimately, what information do I need to get back? So each different event is going to have a different set of criteria and should be planned out ahead of time. And, whether you can, build them out within your PC tools, build them out in your emergency notification system, but have those scenarios and those templates ready to go, because each event, although you set up the same idea and you brainstorm the same way, there's going to be different ways of communicating all this information and to who and what and how.
Wonderful. So I've just been given the 2-minute warning for the webinar. So on that note, I am going to say thank you very, very much to our panelists today. I don't know about anybody else, but I found this personally very interesting. Learned a bit myself, which is always a good sign. And I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. And as I said, what we'll be doing is sending out a link to the recording of the webinar, so you can come back and view this at any time if you wish. So on that note, I would like to wish everyone a fantastic day. Thank you very much.